Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo and Cryptids encounter stories. First story. This story was shared by you/Verolvin94, so credits to him. Creature on Back Road. If you read my first encounter, or whatever you want to call it, well, this all happened just about 7 kilometers down the road from that. A few years later I was out hunting with a friend when we lost legal light. So we hiked back to the truck and hit the road in his parents' new Ford half-ton, the ones with the sensors all over the vehicle. We had some music playing as we were just heading back towards town again, when the music started acting weird and cutting in and out with static, so me being in the passenger seat, disconnected the Bluetooth and reconnected the phone. Music cleared up and we continued down the road. We got up to the KM board on the road that my previous encounter took place and I mentioned, "Oh hey, that's the whistle block that we logged a couple years back." Half jokingly because I couldn't make heads or tails of it. My friend replied, "Great, thanks for that," as I had told him the story before. We continued slowly driving down the road because it gets pretty rough in a couple spots and the road has a few sharp turns and an S-bend. Well, we go about a kilometer further and the music starts screeching and doing what we can only describe as alien noises. So I disconnect the Bluetooth again and my friend says, "Oh, Mom's got a cord in here." So he stops and gets the cord for me. I plug the phone in and play music again. Another kilometer down the road and the phone goes ape shit. I mean loud alien squealing and sounds similar to that shitty dial-up internet noise from the 90s. We had started into the S-bend when this was happening and we shut the music off completely as we are driving still, making the one half of the S-turn and then we both look up from the music deck/screen and the headlight illuminate a figure standing in the middle of the road. So we swerve and take the ditch a bit, still going probably 30 kilometers per hour, and get the truck back up on the road. We continue coasting down the road as we are both in awe after just seeing a flash of this thing. I finally say after what seemed like 5 quiet minutes, "Man, did you just see?" My friend cuts me off and says, "A skeleton in the middle of the road." I say, "Yeah. Like a white rib cage, and a deer skull for a face." He finishes. I said, "Turn around, what the FCK was that? Does someone need our help?" Not thinking that we are in the middle of nowhere, with no vehicles around or any that we had passed from other hunters. It was early season and no one bow hunts here anyways. My friend said, "I'm not turning around, I feel sick. Like I'm going to throw up." And he continued driving. We didn't see another vehicle until we hit pavement again. It was taller than the pickup by easily a couple feet. I'm 6 feet 1 inch and my forehead is at the top of the window for reference. It has black surrounding the white of the bones with long arms half stretched to its sides as if it was saying try and hit me. I watched this thing past the passenger window and stared up at it as we wailed by it, and it was definitely 3-dimensional, tall with long arms and dark. Dead looking. Like light was sucked into it without reflecting anything. Hard to explain. When we hit service again my friend received a text message from his mother saying, "What did you two idiots hit in my brand new truck?" I guess the new Ford send near accident reports to the owner when the sensors pick up something. I'm an old school Chevy guy so I don't know, haha. The only thing I can find online that resembles what we both saw is a Wendigo without the antlers. Or the headlights didn't illuminate them anyway. Second story. This story was shared by you/Habers, so credits to him. Wendigo dream. I did not know what a Wendigo was until this morning after I looked up something I described as a Wendigo. I have never seen a movie or anything with this type of creature before. Maybe I've seen it without fully remembering on something, but I'm telling you I have no memory of anything like this. I live in Montana in a foresty area. I had a dream I was outside my house looking into the woods and saw this really tall humanoid creature with antlers and had deer fur all over it. It was just staring at me. I yelled at it saying, "Hey, go away." And it just was staring at me. Then I looked away for a second at my house to see how close I was, and when I looked back it was gone. I started moving towards my house and a female deer and its baby was in between my house and I. It looked at me and charged me. I started dodging it and running away trying to get closer to the house. It took a while for me to get in my house. It felt as if this deer was trying to really hurt me. It kept charging at me and trying to use its hoofs to knock me down. It was a really strange and scary experience. I eventually made it back in the house. Time passed a little bit in the house, and when I looked out my back door down the hill, I saw the creature again, the Wendigo, which I still didn't know what this was at the time. It was staring at me again. I slid my door open and yelled, "Hey!" Asterisk angrily, and the creature ran up the hill effortlessly, in only a few steps it seemed, and was super fast. It was right in front of me before I could even react. Then I woke up. I didn't see its face close up, I just woke up. I woke up feeling super creeped out and had no idea why I dreamed that or what it was. This morning, I described what I saw on Google and Wendigo seemed like the only option it was. Nothing else seemed to match the description. What really creeped me out afterward is that it described Wendigos as I did and said they were super fast and they could take other forms like a deer or a wolf. It's described as an evil spirit. Does anyone know what this could mean exactly, or has anyone had similar dreams before? Third story. This story was shared by you/horror_writer_1717, so credits to him. I was hunted by a cryptid in a snowstorm. I never thought it would end like this. My truck's windows smashed, blood all over the interior, the frigid wind and snow blowing in on me as those two empty eyes stared in at me like a predator sizing up a helpless animal for the kill. It didn't start out like that, of course. When I started out for my morning run, it wasn't snowing. There was snow on the ground. There had been a quick storm with some squalls that left half a foot of the white stuff on the roads just a few days earlier. The state took care of it pretty quickly, and travel was barely interrupted. Everyone went about their merry way. Even me. The fact that I hated winter even more than driving a truck never entered my mind. Okay, that was a lie. As I drove down the road, I found myself looking at the small piles of snow along the roadside and cursing them for not being big enough to cancel my run. I had to drive my truck through some pretty empty places. The kind that made you long for anything to break up the monotony of 2 lanes of asphalt surrounded by endless trees. I had to drive that route quite often, and it never got any easier to stay awake. I would even imagine seeing odd things looking out of the trees as I flew by. I knew it was my mind playing tricks on me, trying to scare me into staying alert and not crashing the truck. If it had been a deer or bear or something like that, I would have just laughed it off, but this thing looked like it was out of some nightmare. That's how I knew it wasn't real. There was no way it could exist, so I put it out of my mind and kept on driving. Fortunately, with it being a 2-day run, I was able to pick where I wanted to stay after I got my load. Hotels were nice, but if needed I had the sleeper in my cab, which I called home away from home. It wasn't bad as cramped spaces go. There was lots of shelf space above the bunk. I had a TV mounted on the wall hooked up to a GameCube. There was a DVD player with an assortment of movies that I rotated out on a weekly basis. And there were some paperback books. Lord of the Rings, Frankenstein, This Present Darkness, along with all the indie author books I had on my phone. I didn't have to worry about being bored. There was always my laptop that held the novels I'd started writing and never finished. The only thing I really needed was food and a bathroom. I had snacks stashed around, sometimes in places, even I didn't find for months. But it couldn't compare to a nice hot meal. I had my favorite stops on the road, and they all had two things in common: good food and a quiet place to park and sleep. I didn't like having my truck squashed up against other trucks, wondering if I would be able to get my door open if they parked like an idiot. I liked parking near the outskirts of a parking lot. It was more private, and I didn't feel as hemmed in. Of course, there was a trade-off. More privacy meant walking further to get to the truck stop. Sometimes a lot further. But I used that to my advantage. Nothing like a nice long walk to get the blood flowing to all those muscles I didn't use when driving. Unfortunately, the place was a local mom-and-pop operation. Which meant they didn't have the money to stay open 24 hours a day. Usually, I would pull my truck into my spot in the evening, go get supper at the lunch counter, then grab supplies for the night. I'd always go inside one last time to use the restroom just before they closed at midnight. That evening, I followed the same pattern. Pulled in, walked to the store, got some supper, and went back in around 11:30 for restroom and supplies before going back to my truck and falling asleep. Normally I try to keep a good watch on upcoming weather. For whatever reason, I hadn't that day. I woke up around 8 a.m. and looked out to a sea of white. It had snowed, and it had snowed hard. It looked like someone wanted to make up for the snow quota this winter and did it all in 8 hours. I dressed in my cold weather gear and went out to see how bad it was and if my truck would be going anywhere today. When I jumped out of the cab, my legs disappeared. There was at least 2 feet of snow on the ground and it was still putting it down. I trudged around the truck to make sure everything was okay, then got back in the cab, brushing off as much snow as I could first. I climbed into the bunk and turned on the news to the announcement that a major blizzard had hit the area. Wow, I thought. That's some great investigative reporting right there. They were calling for another foot before the snow stopped. Great, time to call the boss and get my ear chewed off. Why can't you get here? He growled. There's this stuff called snow, I said. It lands on the ground and piles up until it begins to impede travel. Alright, smartass, when do you think you can be here? Well, seeing that I haven't even seen a snowplow go by and I'm sitting in a parking lot that probably won't get plowed out until much later than the highways, on top of the fact that my tires are nearly bald even though I've been telling you for months they needed changed, I'll say I have no earthly clue when you'll see your precious cargo. He was silent for a long moment. Do you like your job? He said through barely restrained fury. Not particularly, I said. Then added, when the weather's like this. You might want to update your resume. With that, the line went dead. Thank you for your support, I said to the dial tone. I settled back in, turned off the TV, and went back to sleep. When I first started out in trucking, a fellow driver gave me a tip that I never forgot. Anytime you have the chance to get some rest, take it. That little tidbit helped me tremendously over the years. A little extra sleep means a lot less coffee. When I woke a few hours later and peeked outside, it was still snowing. I looked out my driver's side window and even my tracks were gone. I was feeling the call of nature and decided to brave the elements to take the trek to the truck stop for some relief. I felt a little silly for putting on all my cold weather gear including gloves and goggles. That feeling didn't last long. It was snowing so hard I couldn't even see the truck stop. I drew an invisible line with the side of my truck, aimed in that direction, and started walking. I never read Call of the Wild. I never saw Alive. Maybe if I had, I wouldn't have been so eager to throw myself out into this blizzard just to go pee. Trudging through the snow and the driving wind was growing old quickly. I felt like I should have reached the truck stop by now. I paused and looked around. Two realizations hit me at the same time. First, I couldn't see the truck stop. Second, I could no longer see the truck. As a lovely addition, my tracks were quickly disappearing. I tried to focus on my path toward the truck stop and began trudging again. 15 minutes later, I believe by sheer luck, I saw the store appear off to the right. My track hadn't been dead on, but I was close enough to find the place. My winter gear was starting to fail me, especially with the wind finding all the little places it could inject frigid air. As I approached, I breathed a sigh of relief at getting in out of the cold, not to mention a massive cup of steaming hot coffee. I reached for the door, but it refused to open. Maybe it was frozen shut. I pulled harder, but nothing happened. I looked in through the glass and saw no lights on. It struck me how the walkway wasn't shoveled either. Oh no, I thought. The storm has them stuck at home. My hopes for a nice warm toilet and a steaming hot cup of coffee plummeted. I took one last forlorn look at the dark store and turned back toward my truck. My disappointment grew as I realized my tracks were gone. I was now snowblind and navigating without a compass or any means of direction. I tried to draw an invisible line with the outer wall of the store and hoped it would lead me back to the truck. I felt my cold, wet feet protest as I headed back toward the warmth of my truck. I hugged my jacket attempting to keep the wind out. The snow was up past my knees now and seemed like trudging through mud. In retrospect, it would have been better for me to wait in the truck until I saw a snow plow in the parking lot. I had plenty of empty tea bottles for bathroom emergencies. But there was no use chiding myself now. I had to get back to the truck to keep this mistake from becoming a fatal one. If I got lost and couldn't find the truck, no one would come looking for me. They might not find my frozen body until spring thaw. That was a cheery thought. As if my journey hadn't been hard enough, after a while, something caught my foot and sent me sprawling face first in the snow. I struggled to right myself and quickly wiped the snow from my face, silently thanking God that I had worn the goggles. I tried to get my bearings again, but curiosity nagged at me. What had I tripped on in the middle of a parking lot? I dug down and discovered the offending object. It was a parking space barrier. I chuckled for a moment until I realized to my horror that I should never have come near any of these in the middle of the lot. In fact, a straight trail from the store to the truck the barrier I had tripped on would be a couple of dozen yards to the right. I scraped the rest of it off and saw it was running nearly parallel to my path. I had veered off course badly. The bright side was, I now had a point of reference and hopefully could correct my course. I looked around and found myself adrift in a sea of white. The store had disappeared, and the truck was nowhere to be found. I took a deep breath and used the barrier to aim toward where the truck should be. I remembered one key fact in the process. These barriers lined the edge of the parking lot and just past them was a drop-off. In retrospect, it was lucky I had tripped on it instead of stepping over it and rolling down a hill that I might never make it back up again. I turned to aim myself where I thought my truck was when out of the corner of my eye I thought I saw a shadow of a figure walk by. I couldn't be sure because of the blowing snow made visibility nearly impossible more than a few yards away. It could have just been my imagination. I'd been out in the cold for much longer than I planned, and it was time to get back to the truck. I was suddenly reminded why I got out of the truck, to begin with. I had to pee so badly. I did a quick look and saw nothing but snow, so I whipped it out and let it go. I think whipped it out was a bit of an oversimplification. I fought to unzip my frozen zipper as my bladder screamed a full red alert that it was about to release the floodgates whether I was ready or not. I finally got it out and started the yellow stream when the wind shifted direction, sending it spraying all over my pants. I quickly turned so that the stream was downwind. When I finished, I looked down at the front of my now wet pants and swore internally. Yet another reason to find the truck quickly. Wet pants turned to frozen pants turned to dangerous pants. I looked down at the barrier now covered in flecks of yellow snow and started on my new course. The snow had not let up one bit and my energy started to wane even though I had just been standing around for the last 10 minutes. Trudging through nearly waist-high snow was making me more tired than I had been in a long time. The wind rushing in my ears tore away my hearing. There wasn't anything out here to listen to, and yet I thought I heard something. I looked around but only saw white. Was this my mind starting to play tricks on me like it did when I was driving and thought I saw the creature that doesn't exist peeking out at me from the trees? I turned back to my imagined destination wondering if delusions were the first step in freezing to death. As if to answer, the wind hit me with a solid gust, knocking me down. If I didn't know better, I'd swear I felt a giant hand in the middle of my back before I fell. I looked up and saw nothing but snow, swirling around making mini tornadoes. I chuckled at the irony of them being called snow devils. I guess my own personal snow devil was pushing me around. I got up and started for the truck again. Every step felt like my feet were encased in concrete. I plodded on, trying to pull from whatever reserve energy I had, to keep going. I couldn't die in the middle of a parking lot just yards away from my nice, warm, truck. That would be the ultimate irony. I walked on, barely conscious, wanting only my 18-wheeled safe harbor from this merciless storm. My head was down. I wasn't even looking anymore. It didn't make any difference. I knew I would never find it. I knew it was like looking for a needle in a field of haystacks. There was no way I would ever get BA. I slammed into something and fell back. The snow was so deep I just lay there like a turtle, unable to get off my back. I looked up and saw the thing that had hit me was the back corner of the truck. 2 feet to the right and I would have missed it. I smiled, but it took a lot of energy. I focused everything I had into getting up. Adrenaline took care of the rest. I marched up to the driver's side door and reached into my pocket for the key to unlock it. I couldn't find the key. I ripped off my glove and searched again. Still no key. Despair smothered my mind. If I had dropped it one of the times I fell in the snow, it was lost forever, and so was I. I leaned against the truck door, so close and yet so far. I could almost feel the heat through it. I smashed my fist into my leg in frustration but felt more pain than I should have. I patted the other pocket and felt a lump. I tore off my other glove and reached into the pocket, pulling out the holiest of holies, the key. Tears streamed down my face and quickly froze as I stuck the key in the lock and opened the door. It took every ounce of energy I had left to climb up into the cab and collapse into the driver's seat. A wave of heat washed over me. For the longest time, I just sat there until I mustered the strength to start pulling off my cold weather gear. One piece at a time, I threw them into the passenger's seat until I sat in my underwear only. I leaned my seat back and basked in the warmth that flowed over me like an ocean wave. I imagined sitting on a beach with the sun shining down on me and the water beckoning. I fell asleep like this. I woke to a sore back and stretched as best I could in my seat, then looked out the windshield. The snow seemed to have let up a little bit and the wind wasn't nearly as fierce as before. There was still no sign of a plow and there was no way I was getting anywhere without one. Off in the distance, I could almost see the outline of the store. I wasn't going there again until the parking lot was plowed. But looking around I couldn't imagine how long that might be. There was at least 3 feet of snow already on the ground and it was still putting some down. I crawled into the bunk and covered up for a serious nap. Hours later, I was starting to feel refreshed. I rolled over and turned on the TV, trying to see how bad things were. I couldn't even pick up the local station, so I stuck in a movie. After it was done, I decided I should probably take stock of my supplies since I might be here for a while. I had plenty of snacks, chips, pretzels, and jerky, among other things. As long as I didn't binge I should have been fine. I had drinks in the mini fridge too, but water wasn't a concern. All I had to do was bring some snow inside and melt it. I only needed to check one last thing to make sure I could outlast this storm. I looked at the fuel gauge. I rubbed my eyes and looked at the fuel gauge again. I only had a quarter tank left. That might last and it might not, depending on how long it took to get plowed out. Obviously, once the plow freed me I could drive 100 yards or so to a gas pump. As I was looking at the fuel gauge, my eyes drifted to the windshield and the field of white that stretched out in front of me. The snow had finally stopped. How long that would last, I had no idea. I could finally see the store clearly, but I could also see clearly that it remained closed. It was hard to believe anyone would be plowing that amount of snow anywhere. I guess that's why they had the drop-off along the edges of the parking lot. As I softly chuckled at my realization, my eyes caught movement. There was some kind of animal walking around in the parking lot. At first, I thought it was a deer because of the wide horns on its head, but the longer I looked the more I realized this creature was something else. It seemed bigger than any deer I'd ever seen. Its torso rode above the snow like it was a ship. Its face looked like it had wasted away to the bare skull, and it had massive teeth that went far beyond its jaw. It was rather haunting to look at. It was sniffing around in the snow. The more I thought about it I began to realize that was probably the spot where I had taken a leak. I was mesmerized and horrified by this thing at the same time. I was nearly convinced my mind was playing a trick on me when it looked right at me and my blood turned to ice. Its look pierced my soul and made me wish I'd never come to this place. When it took its first step in my direction I dove back into the sleeper and drew the curtain. I shook for reasons that had nothing to do with the temperature and was breathing in panicked gasps. What was that thing? Did I really see what I thought I saw? How could a creature like that exist? I tried to settle down and get my breathing back to normal, but my mind refused to let go of the image of that thing. It's just my imagination, I told myself. It's just a deer roaming around out there. I told myself that same thing over and over until my mind finally believed it. However, I didn't look through the curtain to confirm it. I didn't call it denial, I called it, not pushing my luck. I pulled out a pack of cheese crackers and turned on the first Die Hard movie to try and forget about the deer outside. I was 15 minutes into the movie when I felt the first nudge. I didn't know what else to call it. It felt like something just nudged my truck. It was almost like when a strong wind gust pushed the cab. But I didn't hear any wind outside. The two sides of my mind engaged in a shouting match over whether I should check it out or ignore it. Fear threw its 2 cents in and, ignore it, won out, until the second nudge. Actually, it was like the 5th or 6th nudge until curiosity took over and made me go take a look. I peeked through the curtain and didn't see anything but snow through the windshield. I climbed out and looked through the passenger's window but saw nothing. I chided myself for my skittishness when I looked through the driver's side window and saw a set of horns. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but they were gone. There were tracks in the snow that looked like deer tracks, only bigger. Or was that my imagination carrying me away again? I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the creature poking at my tires with its horns. I was fairly sure it couldn't puncture one with just horns, but I didn't want to chance it. I reached down, grabbed my club, and opened the door to scare it away, but again, it was gone. I was beginning to question my sanity. Was this thing real? Was it my mind playing tricks on me? Or was the creature toying with me, trying to draw me out of the truck? I closed the door and went back to my movie, but I couldn't get that creature out of my head. I was on pins and needles waiting, listening, anticipating the next nudge. Before the movie was over, I fell into a fitful sleep. I was in a tall building and there were bad guys everywhere. I had a machine gun but had been better served hiding and picking them off one by one. I was sneaking up on one who was standing guard on an isolated floor, and I turned the corner and there stood the deer creature. It was massive, standing on its hind legs and its horns scraped the ceiling. It looked at me with those empty eye sockets from its bare skull face. It made a sound that was half grunt, half growl, then started towards me. I backed away around the corner, trying to get back to my hiding space, but as I turned to run, suddenly the creature was in front of me. I pulled up my machine gun and started firing short bursts. I hit it in the chest, but it kept coming. As I backed away, I shot it several times in the head. I watched as chunks of bone flew, but it kept coming as if it didn't care. I shot at its legs, hoping to throw it off balance, but it had no effect. As if it had had enough, it charged, pinning me to a wall with its horns. I looked down as the blood began to seep from my belly around its horns. It pulled back and charged me again and again, sending shockwaves of pain through my body and crushing my spine. It pulled back and allowed me to fall to the floor. Blood pooled around me as I tried to crawl away from the creature. I could only use my arms. I couldn't feel anything below my waist, which was a partial blessing because it cut my pain in half. After I had crawled a few feet, I suppose it had enough of toying with me. It stomped its foot down on my neck so hard I heard a snap and my arms went dead. I could feel it tear into my back, ripping away pieces of meat. I could hear the sickening chewing and slurping as I was eaten alive. I woke with a start, sweat pouring from my forehead, and looked around the sleeper cab looking for the creature that was tearing me to pieces. After a few seconds, I came to the realization it had been a nightmare. I turned off my DVD player and stuck my head out through the curtain to check on my fuel situation. The needle was well below the quarter mark, almost down to 1/8. I looked out through the windshield and the snow had not magically melted. In fact, The wind had picked up and now it was starting to drift. Where there was once an even field of snow, now there were peaks and valleys forming, like dunes in the desert. The store was still dark and there was no traffic moving on the road. The sun was riding low in the sky and I had yet to see another living soul. I wondered if my fuel would last until a plow could rescue me. Soon I would have to give some serious thought to conserving. It wasn't ideal. The thought of bundling up in blankets in the dark with no heater and no TV to watch wasn't exciting me, but it was better than waiting until my fuel ran out and I froze to death. As I killed the engine, I chided myself for not coming up with this plan sooner. I would have conserved fuel when the sun was out and the temperatures were higher. Now I was going to pay for my lack of foresight. I dug out every blanket I had stored in my closets and laid them over the bed, then tucked in for a long nap. When I woke, I was drowning in utter darkness. I panicked for a moment before I remembered where I was. I looked at my watch and it was 4 in the morning. I pulled the covers off me and was immediately assaulted by cold air. I grabbed a flashlight and found my way into the cab. I turned the key on and waited with bated breath that billowed out in clouds that filled the cab until the engine turned over. As it roared to life, I felt even colder. I looked to my left and froze. My driver's side window lay in pieces on the seat and floor. I slowly turned to look at the passenger's side window, when fear grabbed me. There was a face looking in at me. But it wasn't a human face, it was the ungodly face of the dear creature that had gored me to death in my dream. A river ran down my leg, forming a yellow puddle on the floor as I stared into the dark hollow eyes of this thing sent straight from hell. It reared its head back and then smashed into my passenger's window, splintering it. It reared back again and this time shattered the window, reaching in for me with its fierce long teeth. I jumped back and landed in the driver's seat full of glass. I knew I was dead. There was nothing I could do. I sat there as it entered the cab, coming for me. Its head was halfway inside when it suddenly stopped. It moved around a little bit, then roared in frustration. Its horns were too wide to fit in the window. It tried over and over to get in, but there was no way it could fit with the horns. As suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. I looked around to see where it had gone, but the darkness of night covered it like a shroud. As I was looking, it silently reached in behind me and would have had me if it hadn't breathed out, warning me of its approach. I dove into the center console as its deadly jaw snapped shut right where my spine had been. It continued its assault on this window, gaining ferocity as it frustrated itself by not being able to get a hold of me. I stood in between the two windows, hoping I was safe from either direction. It was then I decided to go back into my bunk and close the curtain. I covered up and reached underneath the bunk to a secret compartment and pulled out my .40 caliber automatic handgun. I took the magazine out and made sure it was loaded with all 10 rounds, then put it back in, pulled back the slide, and flicked on the safety. It made me feel a little better, but not much. I didn't know how true my dream was, or if bullets would do anything to this monster. I no longer had any illusions that this was a deer. It was something much more dangerous and terrifying, and it was after me. I covered up with my blankets again, holding my gun close. The heater wasn't doing much good with 2 windows broken out. I would try to do something about them in the morning when it was light. There was no way I was doing anything in the dark with that thing lurking out there. I lay there for an hour watching every second of the clock tick by, eyes wide open, ears listening for any sound. But there was none, just the wind howling in between the 2 broken windows making my curtains flutter. Eventually, I recognized the futility of having a truck running and the warm air just escaping before it could even get to me. So I got out of my bunk, keeping my new best friend with me, and slowly made my way out to the cab, my head darting left and right to see if the creature was about to launch itself through either of the windows. I turned the key off, and before I could pull it out of the ignition, a set of horns smacked against the frame of the window and the deadly teeth came in and snapped just inches short of my face. I whipped around and pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. It snapped at me again and I panicked until I realized the safety was on. I flicked it off and aimed, but the monster was gone. I didn't dare make a move toward the window for fear it would launch itself back in at me. I stood still as a statue and stared at the window it had come through, then slowly turned to the other side. I kept looking back and forth between the two, trying to keep my peripheral vision on both at the same time. I was shaking, not only from the cold but also from the sheer terror of not knowing where or when this thing was going to show itself. I decided my cold weather gear would be my best option, so I climbed back into the bunk and put on as many layers of clothes as I could find. When I popped my head back out, I was met with the most terrifying sight imaginable. The monster had climbed onto the hood of my truck and was now bashing its head against the windshield, trying to make its way inside. I knew the windshield was wide enough that it would be able to get its antlers inside and I would be done. I pulled the gun up, aimed at its head, and fired. The explosion was massive. I instantly lost my hearing except for the ringing in my ears. I staggered back, but the monster kept coming. Not only had my bullet done nothing to the monster, it weakened the windshield, making it easier to get inside. The monster shook its head in surprise when the bullet ricocheted off the bone, and then continued its assault on the windshield. It hammered on the glass until it shattered into a million pieces. I was already aiming at its face and fired 2 shots before the glass even hit the floor. They both ricocheted off its skull, causing it to rear up just enough for me to fire 2 shots into its chest. It didn't collapse screaming in agony like I wanted, but I could tell it didn't like it either. It jumped down off the hood and disappeared. I stared out into the inky blackness, trying in vain to pick up any glimpse of it. I whipped around from one side window to the other and back again, waiting for it to show its horrid face. After what seemed like forever, I saw horns rising through the passenger side window. I fired a shot into its face, and it disappeared. I threw myself back into the passenger seat when suddenly I saw its head rising in the driver's side window. I fired a shot, making it disappear again. I jumped up and threw myself to the other seat, knowing it would be on the passenger side soon. Sure enough, 10 seconds later, it appeared and I fired another shot. It was toying with me. It disappeared and I threw myself over into the passenger seat, waiting, aiming at the empty driver's window. But instead, I felt teeth clamp down on my neck. It had fooled me. I shoved my gun up under its skull and fired a shot. If I hadn't been deaf from the first shot, this one right next to my ear would have done it. And yet somehow I heard it squeal in pain as it released me. I knew I had been inches from death. I reached up and touched the wound on my neck and came away with a handful of blood. I went back into my bunk, tore away a piece of sheet, and pressed it to my wound. Then I tore some more of the sheet and tied it around my neck to hold the bandage in place. I went back out to the cab only to see it crouching on the hood waiting for me. I never thought it would end like this. My truck's windows smashed, blood all over the interior, the frigid wind and snow blowing in as those 2 empty eyes stared in at me like a predator sizing up a helpless animal for the kill. It crawled in through the remains of the windshield. I knew I was dead. In desperation, I shoved the gun into one of its eye holes and squeezed the trigger. The sound it made was something I'd never heard before and never wanted to hear again. The scream was both a low guttural sound and a high-pitched shriek. It sounded like someone had unleashed a demon from the pits of hell. My mind screamed at me. Get out of there. I fumbled with the driver's door and ended up falling out when it opened. On a clear day, with no snow, I would have gotten a concussion or broken bone falling on the bare asphalt. With 3 feet of snow on the ground, I landed on a soft, cold pillow. It was the only time in the last 24 hours that the snow had helped me. I immediately jumped up and looked around for any place to hide. But there was nowhere. Everything was covered in snow. I glanced back at the trailer and realized the snow was so high that it reached the bottom of the trailer. I couldn't see underneath at all. I quickly dove under it, then turned around and tried to pile snow into the opening to hide where I had gone. I shone my light around at the beautiful sight of bare asphalt. I lay there on my belly, looking all around trying to see in every direction at once to see where the monster would attack from. My breath blew out in billows of desperate smoke as I came up empty. There was nothing. The monster wasn't there. Yet. I didn't dare hope to imagine that my shot had killed it. If anything, it made it even angrier. It was probably destroying the inside of my truck at that very moment. What I didn't trust was that the monster wouldn't find me underneath the trailer. I looked around for anywhere I could use as a better hiding place. My eyes fell on the wheels of the truck. It looked like there was just enough room between the tires and the differential. It would be a tight squeeze, but it was better than that thing finding me. I turned around and slid my feet in first. The further I slid, the tighter it got. Ironically, the grease and oil from the differential helped me slide through a little easier. When I almost had my shoulders through, it suddenly felt too tight. I was stuck. I couldn't move forward or backward. Panic flooded my mind and I struggled frantically like I couldn't breathe. After the longest minute of my life, I finally managed to maneuver my shoulders through and into my hiding spot. The hood of my coat did double duty of keeping me warm and completing my hiding place. I lowered it to the level of the asphalt and would raise it just an inch when I wanted to look out. The first half hour was the worst. The ringing in my ears had begun to subside, but I still didn't hear anything outside of my own breathing. The cold slowly leaked through my clothes. Still no sign of the monster. Another hour passed. My muscles started to cramp up. Still no sign of the monster. Another hour. I felt like my bladder would burst. Still no monster. During the long boredom in between, I pulled the magazine out of the gun and counted how many bullets I had left. No matter how many times I counted, it always came out to the same number, 1. I knew one bullet wouldn't save me from the monster. There was only one thing I could do with one bullet, end my suffering if it found me. I took it out of the magazine and stared at it. I used my coat to shine it up, then stared at my reflection in the gleaming metal. The edges of the snow around the trailer began to glow. I knew the sun was coming up. Darkness was no longer my friend. I was about to give up and crawl out of my hiding place when I heard it. A soft sniffing sound. I lifted my hood an inch, just enough to peek out, and there it was. Its head had broken through the wall of snow close to where I dove under the trailer. There were a few drops of blood from my neck wound and it was sniffing them. Those drops would lead it right to me. Sure enough, it took a turn toward the front of the trailer and looked in my direction. I lay there still as a stone as it inched its way toward me. It was having trouble squeezing its massive body under the trailer, and I could hear it growling with frustration. It came closer, crawling right toward me. There was no doubt it knew I was there. I closed my eyes and stuck the barrel of the gun under my chin. I felt its hot breath and smelled the stench of death as I squeezed the trigger. Suddenly it shrieked and I could feel the truck bucking above me. I opened my eyes to the most amazing sight. Its horns had gotten caught in the chains hanging down underneath the trailer, and it was tangled. It screamed and bucked and fought to be free from its metal captors. It yanked backward so hard I felt the truck move sideways an inch. The differential was pressing on me now, and I had to shimmy over to avoid being crushed. I watched as the chains broke away one by one, and then it was free. I took the opportunity to crawl out from under the truck. It was useless as a hiding place now. It had already tracked me here. I was almost out when I heard another sound and saw a shadow pass by the other side of the truck. It was coming back, but it was trying from the other side. I crawled as quickly as I could. This was my chance. If it searched from the other side, it might not know I had left. I had no idea where I would go, but it was better to be out of a useless hiding place. Besides, I desperately needed to stretch and pee. As I stood next to the truck, I saw a large patch of red in the snow. I guess shooting it wasn't as useless as I thought. I took care of business first, peeing before I ruined another pair of pants. I finished and thought about where to hide. I looked up at the ruined cab of my truck when the nightmare crept around the corner. I stood there helpless. It had caught me flat-footed. I had nowhere to go. It stared at me as it limped around the corner. Its empty eyes seemed to exude rage. I pulled up the gun and aimed when it disappeared in a moving mountain of snow. The snowplow had finally arrived. I watched as the plow pushed its mound of snow past my truck and over the edge of the parking lot. The driver backed up and stopped beside me. "You been here all night?" the driver said. "Since before the storm." "What happened to your truck?" he said, looking up at my shattered windows. I followed his eyes and thought for a moment. "Someone tried to rob me," I lied, knowing the truth was unbelievable. "I see you took care of it," he said, looking at the gun in my hand. I looked down at the gun and stuck it in my waistband. "It's been a hell of a night," I said. "Well, don't worry, the roads are getting cleared and I'll get you plowed out of here." "Thanks," I said. He nodded and backed up to continue plowing. I looked at where he had just plowed beside my truck and saw a long smear of red. I followed it to the edge of the parking lot and looked over the side with my hand on my gun. The drop-off was a good 10 feet or more, and the snow had already started to pile up. I followed the path of red down the hill with my eyes and saw antlers poking out of the snow. I stared at them looking for any movement. For 10 minutes I watched, and they didn't move. I was interrupted when the plow pushed another pile of snow over the side, covering the antlers. I watched for another 5 minutes just to be sure. The plow guy pulled up beside me. "You okay?" he said. I pulled my eyes away from the snow pile. "Yeah, I'm good." "You sure?" he said, pointing at my neck. "Yeah, I just got nicked by some glass," I said, remembering the teeth of the monster clamping down on my neck. "Well, I think someone just pulled into the store," he said. "Maybe you should get something for that." "I will, thanks," I said, knowing I would do no such thing. I wanted to avoid as many questions as possible. I climbed into the cab, brushed the glass off my seat, and drove over to the fuel pumps. After filling up, I started the long trip home. I kept my cold weather gear and mask on, having no windows or windshield made for a frigid trip. The heater was on max and aimed at my feet, keeping the bottom half of me warm. I didn't call for a tow truck because I wanted to get away from there. I never went back to that truck stop again. I didn't want to take the chance of that thing being alive. I never told anyone else about the harrowing encounter. I wish I could erase it from my mind. As I drove towards my home terminal through the endless stretch of trees, I saw one of the creatures peeking out at me that I used to think was my imagination. Now I know better. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/one additional 2103, so credits to him. Help. Just bought a home with property and something isn't right. I just bought a home on the Ohio/Michigan border. It is in the middle of the woods. I only own about 5 acres, but it is surrounded by over 600 acres of woodland. There is only one other house nearby. I've noticed a few strange things, and had a few strange things happen recently. I will explain in detail. I'm worried about the possibility of a Wendigo or skinwalker, but I am not knowledgeable on the subject and would like to learn as much as possible to protect my family. The red flags. An older single woman sold us the home. Her daughter and son-in-law were helping her sell it by owner. Many times the daughter mentioned about how her mother was paranoid living there. She had lived there for over 20 years, but now never leaves the home. Even though she is in good health. She said she would never answer the door whenever someone knocked, and there are cameras outside. There is also a flashlight in every room. They accepted our offer of almost $60,000 under asking price. We loved the property and told them that, but couldn't afford what they were asking. They met us where we could afford it. During the home inspection, the inspector tried opening a window and it was stuck shut. He went to try another and the homeowner stated, "None of the windows open, they haven't in years." I didn't think anything of it, and just assumed they were old and broken. Home was built in 1985 and has original windows. Inspector also found some issues with the exterior of the house, just appeared to be a lack of maintenance outside. Once again the family stated that the homeowner just didn't like to be outside anymore and spends all her time inside. I met with the homeowner at her house again so I could gather some measurements. While I was there she showed me how a few things in the home work. She made it a point to show me a light on a pole outside. She said, "If that light ever goes out, replace it immediately. It is way too dark out there without it." She has also stated that at night, we will hear coyotes right up against the house, as they like to gather by a bush near the front porch in the winter. A co-worker of mine has lived in the woods 2 counties over for years. He just went through a rough divorce and was forced to sell his home. He just gifted me an Axis deer skull with antlers. He said it was gifted to him when he bought his property and he kept it by his front door. He now wants me to have it, and suggested I hang it up outside. I'm a hunter and thought it was cool and never thought more of it until now. My fiancé and I have both been having nightmares. Not about a Wendigo, but my nightmare is about my newborn son getting possessed by something. I've had the dream a few times. My fiancé won't tell me about her dream. We haven't taken possession yet, but we will on November 6th. I'm concerned something is going on with this property and want to know if you all think I have anything to worry about. If you think I do, what can I do? Fifth story. This story was shared by you/Verolvin94, so credits to him. I don't know what it was. I am a logger in northern BC, Canada. I am an avid hunter and have spent many a nights hunting alone. That being said, quite a few years ago, I was working on a broken down skidder in the dark after everyone on the logging block was gone, changing a blown hydraulic hose under the cab when I felt like I was being watched. The feeling continued to get worse and worse, so I was on edge and continued to work on replacing the blown hose. Every trip for tools to the service truck and back I would scan for eyes in the nearby tree line about 25 meters away with my flashlight. Nothing. Continued to work on the pain in the SS hose that you literally have to dive your head and upper body under the cab to reach, and so your legs are stuck up in the air and feeling vulnerable. The feeling of being watched gets more intense. All the hairs on my neck are standing and I hear a two-tone whistle from far away. Almost as if it was wind. It was so far away, but it was flat calm that day. Also there was about 6 inches of fresh snow on the ground. I pushed myself out from under the skidder and looked around quietly with a flashlight for eyes in the tree line and down the road. Nothing. I had one side of the hose fitting to remove still, and it was the easier side and higher up, so I wasn't at SS over tea kettle removing it. I put my head back under the cab and quickly began to spin the fitting loose. The feeling of being watched was so bad every hair on my body was standing, and then I hear the same two-tone whistle very loudly in the tree line directly behind me. I had the hose off at the exact same time, so I whipped myself out from under the cab and turned ready to throw down with a 1 5/8 wrench in my hand, yelling, "Alright, where the F, CK, RYA?" Nothing, no one there, no tracks, no eyes, no wind, nothing. The flashlight I had was more of a small floodlight for working on repair stuff, so it didn't light up inside the trees. The next day it had snowed another 6 inches or so, but I went and hiked the tree line with a 12 gauge and 7.3 slugs ready to go. No tracks that I could see, no perches on the trees where snow had been pushed off, if it was a bird. Nothing. See the next post for the second incident. 6th story. This story was shared by you/Born Beach, so credits to him. Last night something came into my bedroom. I think it left a message. I feel like an insane person saying this, sharing this here, but I don't know where else to go. My mother laughed at me. My own mother. She said it was just a nightmare, sleep paralysis, she said. Perfectly normal. Perfectly common. But what happened to me wasn't normal or common. It's something that's never happened to me before in my life. My mind's going a mile a minute and I can't get my head straight because even now, 12 hours later at 3 in the afternoon, my heart's pounding. I keep looking over my shoulder, expecting to see it there. To see him. I need help. I need help. I need help. I need help. But who's going to believe me? Fuck. Let me explain things. I live in an apartment. Nothing big. A single bedroom in an unremarkable part of town, not bad, not good. Just there. Last night I went to bed at the same time as I always do, 10 p.m. after brushing my teeth, turning on my sleep app, and reading my book. I fell asleep in about half an hour. Let's call it 10:30. I'm a side sleeper. Always have been. I'll either sleep facing my bedroom, or toward the wall and the window. My cat, Opie, usually curls up next to me but leaves at some point during the night, either to get a drink, stretch his legs, or because I've moved and he's uncomfortable. Either way, it's rare he'll stay with me throughout the whole night. I'm a fairly light sleeper, so usually when he wakes up and decides to leave, I'll stir briefly before drifting back to sleep. Last night was no different. At least, that's what I'd thought. I woke up facing the bedroom wall, It was dark out, maybe darker than it should have been given the curtain was open and my window is large enough to let in a decent amount of moonlight. But it was pitch. I remember feeling a weight behind me, a small point of pressure pressing into the mattress. Opie, I thought. He was sitting on the other side of me, probably having woken up in the middle of the night and getting ready to go about his way. I closed my eyes. I didn't think anything of it. But then the weight shifted, it pressed down harder, heavier than any cat could be, and my eyes shot open. I couldn't move. I lay there, staring at the wall, my skin prickling and a sensation deep inside of me telling me that something wasn't right. That I wasn't safe. I tried to roll, to confront the strangeness behind me if only to prove that it wasn't there. My body merely rocked back and forth. And then a shadow crept over me. A darkness within the darkness, something deeper than the black of my bedroom. It stretched across my mattress, my sheets, and my breath froze. Still unable to move, I could only gaze sideways as it inched across my wall like a phantom. Something caught my eye. A glint in the window glass. A shape, leaning on my mattress with long arms, its torso bent over and examining me. It looked human, almost. Like a man dressed in a pale cloak, and yet what was underneath it couldn't have been human. It was hard to make out. Difficult to see in the dim, but the man, the creature standing behind me, had no eyes. Where its eyes should have been sat a crown of thorns, and behind that were two deep gouges, rough and bleeding as though carved with a rock. But worst of all was its nose. It didn't have one, not in a human sense. Instead, a long snout protruded from its face, hairless like a pig's and mangled. Its weight shifted on the mattress. The creature moved toward my legs, my feet. I could no longer see it in the reflection of the windowpane, but I could feel it. Hear it. Its nostrils were flaring with gusts of warm air as it moved along my body. It was smelling me, I realized. Taking my scent. It worked its way up to my throat, taking short sniffs, and then it stopped. My heart shuddered in my ribcage as I heard something unfurl. The next moment something heavy and rancid fell over me, and I knew it was that thing's cloak. The pale one. Except now that I was beneath it, feeling its texture against my cheek, I knew that it wasn't fabric. It was flesh. Once more it pressed its flaring snout against my neck, but this time I felt its jaws open. I felt its jaws wrap around my neck, and its teeth scrape across my skin. I opened my mouth to speak, to scream, but the words wouldn't come out. All I could manage was a slurred whimper. Its decrepit fingers crept into my hair, gripping it and pulling my head back. Its jaws moved from my neck and its snout touched the corner of my ears, and then it spoke. Or at least, I think it did. Its voice was a mess, like human vocal cords pulled apart piece by piece and rearranged into something twisted. Still, I recognized one word. My name. At that moment something overcame me. Panic. Fear. I don't know what it was, but I rioted. I rocked my body back and forth with everything I had, knowing that if I didn't break this spell then I was going to die in my bed. All the while the monster kept speaking to me in that unintelligible voice, scraping against my neck with its teeth, painfully gripping my skull with its long fingers. Tears welled in my eyes as I threw everything I had into my shoulder, everything I had into rolling over and breaking this paralysis. And I succeeded. My body lurched and I flipped sideways, my voice cracking as I prepared to confront my own death. But it wasn't there. The dark of my bedroom greeted me, quiet and still. In the corner of the room, My fan spun in lazy circles, blowing air across an empty hardwood floor. There was nobody. Nothing at all but me. Heart pounding, I sat up. My eyes scanned the room 10 times, then I scanned it 10 times more. I looked out the bedroom window and saw my empty balcony, the moon drifting back from behind a series of clouds. Calm down, I told myself. Calm down. I did a breathing exercise, in through the nose, out through the mouth, all the while reminding myself that I was too old for these kinds of nightmares. I lay back in my bed. So often at night we have moments like these, moments where we're halfway between the dream world and our own reality, and it becomes difficult to discern where one world ends and the other begins. I felt like that then. Or at least, I thought I did. I thought it was just as my mother would later suggest, a bad case of sleep paralysis. A vivid night terror. Then my door creaked open. I watched as my cat, Opie, crept into the room growling. His tail was straight up, his ears pulled back, and he looked at me and made a sound he'd never made before in his life. A hiss. He was hissing and growling in turn, stalking back and forth in the center of the bedroom. I slipped from my covers, my feet pressing against the cold hardwood floor. There wasn't any such thing as monsters. Opie probably was reacting to my overreaction, and now I'd gotten him scared to death. Poor guy. I bent down to pick him up, but he squirmed away. Bolted from the room. Confused, exhausted, and emotionally drained, I gave up and turned back to my bed. Something looked back at me from the window. Not from the other side of it, but from within the glass. A reflection. A face with a crown of thorns covering 2 gouged eyes. I stumbled backward, mouth dry, before spinning around and confronting nothing at all. The same empty bedroom I'd always been in. I looked back to the window and saw only my own reflection. No monster. Just a grown man who'd seen one too many horror movies. Shaking my head, I resolved to sleep with the light on in a last-ditch effort to get over this childlike paranoia. As I crawled back into my covers though, I noticed a notification on my phone. My sleep app had registered a new recording. That brings me to now. I've had nightmares before, I've had night terrors and even sleep paralysis. I know what that's like. Last night, I thought I'd had just another case of that, but after I played that recording I couldn't close my eyes. I stayed up all night, curled up with my cat in the living room, eyes peeled with every light on in the suit. It's how I know my mom is wrong. See, the sound that my sleep app picked up wasn't me snoring, it was something else. A voice, I think. I've attached it here in case anybody can help me make heads or tails of it, but please use your discretion. Whatever this thing is, it isn't human. If I'm being honest, I don't even know if it's safe to listen to. But I feel like there's a message inside of the audio. I feel like that creature was trying to tell me something, and I'm afraid that none of this will end until I hear it. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.